So, oh, wow. Hey there. Hey, world. Great to see you. Sorry, we were having too much of a good time here and we lost track of it. Welcome. So excited to have you here at Innovation Unscripted. They're still partying too hard right now, so let me bring you all back here first. So, hello, my name is Monica King. I'm the founder and CEO of InnovatorsBox and your host at Innovation Unscripted. We're super excited. So as you join in, please drop by and say hello where you're tuning in from. We have some folks from, let's see, California, different places. So say hello, Tim, shout out, Alex, Jerry, on. Great to see you all. With that being said, as you briefly saw, we have a bunch of other friends who have here to share. And for those who have been part of our show previously, we've been talking about what it means to be innovative and to celebrate what it means to be innovative who happens to be Asian American. And so I have some group of friends who I want you to really meet. And so I'll tell them to do a little dance break and share a little bit more about who they are so that you actually get to know them. So here, Priyanka, are you now?
Hey everyone, I'm Priyanka Komla, partying at the beach. I'm a technologist with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and the podcast producer of Career Startup Podcast, a podcast to spotlight Asian entrepreneurs, and I'm excited to be here today.
I'm Kevin Felix Chan, also known as KFC. I'm from LA, and I'm rethinking creativity in the education space and in Model United Nations.
Hi everyone, my name is Hanju. I am the founder of Asian Creative Network, which is an online platform to help connect and network Asian creatives all over the world, and I am rethinking intersectionality in the workplace.
What up? My name is Andy Jang. I am calling in from LA, aka the beach, as per my background. And I'm a comedian, and I am rethinking Asian stereotypes in comedy and in entertainment.
Hi, everyone. My name is Van. I'm also in Los Angeles with Andy at the beach. And my company is called WorkSmart. And I am bringing creativity into the workplace to innovate how we look at team development and leadership training.
Hi, my name is Tarina Ahuja. I'm from Northern Virginia, or Virginia Beach. And I am rethinking youth engagement in politics and policy. So I'm the co-founder of the Greater Good Initiative, a organization that is a youth-led policy think tank, and the co-founder of Young Casa Girls, an organization empowering young girls to do service and advocate for their communities.
Hi everyone, I'm here inside the Beach Cafe. My name is Emily Rosado. I'm here from Maryland, and like Kevin, I work in education. I'm a professor in a two-year college.
Hey, my name is Leo Chan. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and I work in the corporate environment in the food industry, and I'm here to be a catalyst to make innovation and creativity thrive.
Hey everybody, my name is Irene Kwong. I am the owner and designer at Simply Gilded in Seattle, Washington, and I am rethinking innovation and creativity in the paper planning and stationery space.
Hey, my name is Emika Soltis. I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I am the executive director of Freedom University, which is an underground freedom school for undocumented students. And I'm rethinking freedom schools in the 21st century to advance social justice.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yiying Liu. I am here in San Francisco at home right now. I'm an artist, entrepreneur, educator. I am rethinking of bringing creativity and play in business. I also speak internationally about cross-cultural design, creativity, and innovation in both English and Chinese Mandarin. I've also created iconic characters for global company like Microsoft and Disney, including the dumpling, the chopstick, the fortune cookie, and the takeout box, and very soon the boba emoji on your phone. Nice to meet you, everyone.
And so with that all being said, I hope you are excited for round 2, Innovation Unscripted with Asian Americans. So we are super pumped. Yes, we got some fun here, and we're excited to have all of you here. So continue as you tune in. Wonderful to see all of you from Maryland, DC, shout out Seattle, LA. Oh, sorry. There's nobody from Las Vegas yet, but we'll give you credit if you're going to join a party very soon. We're so excited because, as I kickstarted this last week and many others who have seen some of my shows, InnovatorsBox is all about celebrating innovators' diverse voices. And, honestly, even for me, when I started in this journey of InnovatorsBox, I found that there's often one demographic, one type of storyline of what it means to be innovative. And that's not true. Flash, surprise. And as you see here, innovation and innovators walks lives of different ways. They come from all different backgrounds. Just happens to be there's also a lot of Asian Americans. And so we wanted to take the opportunity to celebrate their voices, to celebrate Asian American Pacific Island Heritage Month, which is May. Coincidentally, we also have Mental Health Awareness Month. We might talk about some of that as well. And so for those who tuned in last week, thank you for joining us back. We had a lively conversation about, thinking about identity, perfectionism. I'll admit we have a bit of that as well. The amazing culture that we have, food diversity, dumplings, yes, absolutely, as Ying said, and many other aspects of what makes us Asian. But there's just so much more. So I had to invite more friends here. And so to kick started, I would ask if everyone can basically draw an image of maybe when you think of innovation, what's an image or a word that comes to mind for you? And then I'm going to say, everyone's ready. And for folks who are tuning in, if you want to share it in the chat box, maybe, what does innovation or creativity means for you? Then I will start. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Put your word or image on the screen, please. Oh, look at that. Love it. Well, yeah, Andy, I might be okay, awesome. Well, I would love to actually follow up. Thank you all for sharing. If I can go first to maybe Andy and Emiko, if you can briefly share what that image means and tell me a little bit more about that, Andy.
Yeah, so my image is of a box and a light bulb. And when I think innovation, I think thinking outside of the box. And I also think of cliches like I just used right there. And the idea is that so much of creating, when you first start out as a creator, you're copying your favorite people, you're copying things you see on TV, you're copying. But eventually, after doing that for 5 years, you start to find your own voice and you start to take what you like and combine it into something that represents you and who you are. So I think thinking outside the box is the first step towards that.
Emiko, go ahead.
Thank you. My image is a strangely drawn hand, but it's a fist, reclaiming power. I think of innovation more in terms of disruption. Disruption in our own minds of what is normal, disruption in what society thinks is okay, what people expect of us. And so for me, I think it's getting past this desire to be obedient or to be quote unquote nice and just kind of disrupt those expectations is a first step in being creative and innovative.
Love it. Thank you so much for both sharing that. And that reflects very much of, our conversation of noting about, innovation and innovators is different things, whether it's starting to learn how we copy, learn from others, and then finding that voice through that, as you have both shared. So I want to tie this a little bit more. I've asked all of you as well, what's a random object that made you first think about innovators in a different way or inspires you to rethink about it? So when I say ready, set, go, do you have the object next to you? Ready? Okay. So when I say ready, set, go, I want you to say 1, 2, 3. Oh, love it. Love it. Okay. If I can go with maybe Kevin and Hanju, briefly share a little bit more what that is.
So I have a ukulele on here, which I actually don't know how to really play for real, but I got this in Hawaii, and instead of thinking of Hawaii as like a beach vacation destination, I thought of it as a place to reflect and think about, beyond, stare out into the ocean and think about what are all the endless possibilities. And this is what this reminds me of.
Awesome. Yeah. So this is a spool of thread. So I have been a sewer, kind of like old lady sewer, since I was in middle school. It's like a weird hobby that I picked up back then. And I think back then it was just kind of like a hobby that I did, you know, a fun little thing where I could like make dresses and bags and express myself in that way. But recently I've been making masks to donate to the current pandemic efforts. And so I think, yeah, it was just really interesting. And I think looking at thread, right, it can be used in so many different ways. And like my hobby and like my talent in sewing before, when it was just a thing that I did, and now it's kind of being used to really, yeah, put in an effort into the pandemic. So I think innovation of just like, yeah, being able to turn this thing that I used to do into something greater and bigger, and kind of rethinking things I used to do, rethinking the ways that I used to do things to be able to kind of fit better into the current person that I am and the current things that I'm doing.
Love it, love it. And as you were sharing, we had some folks tuning in saying that it's basketball, Hawaii for some. Oh, somebody's from Hawaii. Awesome. Basketball or family for them is something that inspires them. And, you know, having great people around them that inspires, and that echoes really much both of what you shared, because at the end of the day, what I hope you're hearing every time you join us, whether live or later on, is that creativity really comes from all different sizes. And whether it's you finding that flow from the music that you have at home, or it's reinventing a skill maybe you thought you didn't use and using that to give and empower others through that. And so that all being said, what I also love about all of you and the work you do is that you serve communities. The word community, when I say that, actually means something else for each one of you, because your audience is somebody different. So if you can take a second, could you please write who, when I say who, you know, thank you for rethinking about what you do in your community. I want you to write down who your community and constituents are, and give me. And I know many of us serve many audiences. Are we ready? So 1, 2, 3. Who are the people that you serve? You can put it closer. Take a look at all of this amazingness. Thank you for sharing that. I want to follow up briefly to Ying and Van. If you can share a little bit more about how you serve your community.
Thank you, Monica. My community to me is really the global community. It's everyone. But in the meantime, to honor the heritage where I'm coming from and the lineage, which is Asian, I think it is like a Marco and Michael lenses. I think the work I do, primarily a lot of them are very visual, and visual language transcend the linguistic barrier and also sometimes cultural barriers as well. So in this sense, my audience is global. And this piece actually, it's funny, KFC mentioned about UN. I made this piece for the United Nations, the biodiversity. Actually, Biodiversity Day is coming soon, and it's on 22nd of May, and 21st of May is the Global World Culture Day. So it is really kind of we're on the internet, and the global audience is our audience. But in the meantime, we're all Asian and Asian Americans. So it is also regional too.
Hi guys. So I wrote on mine, human beings being given a voice. So my work is in bringing creativity into the workplace, into the corporate world. And I do it through different types of creative modalities, right? I bring in a DJ for some things. I do creative artwork myself. But really, ultimately, what I really realize is that it's not about the art and the creativity. It's about using creativity to give everyone a voice. Because again, like if you think about the corporate environment, not all of us can be good at accountants. Not all of us can be good at marketing, but we all have the capacity for creativity. So we're able to address all different types of innovation through the lens of creativity. Everyone has a chance to have their voice heard. And in the lens of Asian Americans, as I reflected on that and as I reflect on the work I do, I realized like, wow, this is really empowering to me too, because I don't think as Asian Americans, we grow up with that voice in many of our households. So to be able to give that to myself and to others has been really powerful.
And that ties to actually some of the deeper conversations we want to continue to have, but I want to make sure we hear a little bit more, because actually all of you do serve different communities. So if I can next hear maybe Emily and then Leo and Tarina, if you can share briefly about how you serve your constituents. Yes, please.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I am a professor at a 2-year college, and here in Maryland, outside of DC, and we do serve a lot of underserved students, a lot of DACA students, a lot of students who are first-generation college students. like I was. So it's been a real joy, you know, to serve them and to kind of help them through the process and just be a mentor or someone who could guide them, you know, someone that I didn't have and that I think just makes such a huge difference in your level of motivation and just, you know, your feeling of belonging. Also, I do a lot of, you know, mental health advocacy, which we'll probably talk about later, so I don't want to hog up too much time.
Yeah, so I really resonate with what Van Line just said. So I work at Chick-fil-A corporate here in Atlanta, and my community is all of our employees at our corporate headquarters. And I love what Van Line just said around creativity giving us a voice. I think innovation does the same thing. We organizationally believe that everyone's an innovator at Chick-fil-A, and I believe the same way. And I think innovation is that unlocking of the ideas that we bring, the new perspectives that we bring. And so having the privilege of being able to do that and empower that for people at my workplace is an incredible privilege.
Yeah, I want to also echo some of the points that other people have been making. I think for me, when I think about community, the first word that comes to my mind is empathy. Because I see my community as anybody that I can empathize with. And I think that's literally everyone, because everybody has a reason for why they believe what they believe. And I think it's all about sparking that conversation. So in my work, I do a lot with amplifying the voices of youth, trying to foster civil discourse, trying to advocate for minority communities and criminal justice reform and immigration reform and lots of different areas. But I think one of the key parts about innovation is really hearing voices from everywhere. And that's what you've been talking a lot about, Monica, which really resonates with me, because it's making sure that everybody has a platform, everybody has a microphone. And I see my work in my community as being somebody that can give others the microphone so that we're all heard.
And Irene, I know you have also a huge community online. Share us a little bit more how you're serving online and online.
So I actually am in the paper planner space. So there's a lot of people, there's been a renaissance of sorts recently where people go back to paper planning. There's something about putting pen to paper. So for me, a lot of my work is speaking through my journey to a lot of people. Like I'm very like shy and I'm very introverted. And so like through my work, I express myself a lot through my art. And I think a lot of people can connect with that and connecting with my inner child and my journey and seeing that, you know, as somebody who is shy and introverted and not very outspoken, helping just finding my voice in the process has helped other people do the same, that they can also, you know, if they don't have a voice, that they can use their creativity and tap into that connectivity with themselves to express themselves and to find more confidence.
Thank you. Thank you for all sharing that. Can I give a little round of applause for all the awesome work that you do? And I hope as all of you are listening, there's a lot of nuggets. And I just have to acknowledge, we have a little fan moment going on, Emily. We have, I think, a lot of your students here who's super excited. So a little wave for them.
Hi, guys.
And then for many others as well. But we do have some questions that's coming up, and I want to circle this back. So one, great question from Mine Hatch, and asking about, you know, this is all great that we serve so many communities, whether it's with empathy, thoughtfulness, thinking about where we bring in our unique asset. But, you know, it's another thing about thinking about it's not easy. Can we all admit that actually community building, what you all do is a lot more nuanced and complicated? And if I remember correctly, you all probably wear at least at a bare minimum 2 to 3 hats. Actually, that's kind of like almost like, you know, actually, Monica, no, it's more than that. 2 to 3 is too small. I had to do so much because you all love to empower others in the work you do. And I think that's a trait of what it means to be an innovator. And so it kind of ties to a question I had, which somebody asked, Mine Hatch, is what obstacles do you as an Asian American face in bringing creativity and innovation to your communities? And I would love to hear, maybe perhaps take a moment to think about it. If you would like to share some thoughts, if you want to raise your hand, and then I'll give the spotlight to you. So who has some thoughts on that question? So again, what obstacles do you as an Asian American face in bringing creativity and innovation to your communities? Yes, Priyanka.
The first obstacle is trying to convince people about your vision. And you know, that's through being assertive, and that's always a challenge. How do you get the buy-in from your different stakeholders? Because you look different, your thought process is slightly different. So that's one of the major challenges that you see. And the second one is, how effectively do you communicate your vision, given the cultural barriers that you have as an Asian American? And getting a seat at the table. The third one is, I would say, getting a seat at the table where you can actually communicate your vision for change and innovation. So those would be the three things that I would say are the biggest obstacles. It's how do you be more assertive? How do you be more communicative? And three is finding a seat at the table to do 1 and 2.
Yeah, for me, I think actually the biggest challenge has been myself. So I also am very introverted. I think Irene talked about that. And I've been in the corporate environment. I've actually had to be put in front of a lot of groups and teams, and especially the innovation work that I do now. My biggest roadblock is myself, because sometimes, I'll feel the introversion. I don't want to talk, and I'm uncomfortable in front of crowds, and people actually don't know that about me. They think I'm like super extroverted, and I'm not. It's just that I had to kind of put it aside and put on extroverted Leo when I have to, so that I can talk about innovation and equip people to enable them, to give them that voice. And so I intentionally set up one-on-ones. I'm terrified when I'm doing one-on-ones when I don't know that person, but I believe so much in innovation and in allowing people to see the light, if you will, that I'm willing to put that aside. So I've actually just had to overcome my like shyness and like wanting to be not in front of crowds and all those types of things.
Yeah, to add to that, one of the main obstacles I have is really just casual racism, because I do a lot of stand-up, and comedy is mostly dominated by straight white men, and they still think it's okay. I mean, even like mainstream media, they think it's okay to make fun of Asians. So that's like one of the big things, is trying to create space for myself and for my fellow Asian American comedians, so that we aren't reduced to just like another small penis joke. So I would say like that's one of the main obstacles right now, is just creating content and putting myself out there and creating space for myself and others, so that we can continue to innovate in that space.
Thank you all for sharing that. We were having a little blast moment in the chat room. They're like, oh, yes, tips for introverts. We need that. And then concrete understanding and Leo shout out, because we were all seeing like, wait, but you're such a natural. And Andy, thank you for acknowledging that culture nuance, because, honestly, let's be honest, with COVID-19, many of us have been targets in different ways. And there's been more uncomfortable conversations. And I think, what it means to serve our community, what it means to be an innovator who happens to be Asian American, I think is being aware of all these different things and just thinking about that, and thinking through how we present. And so thank you all for sharing that. And it kind of ties to some of the other questions that are continuing to show up, which is I even made a point about, what challenges did you have to overcome with your family to do what you do in the creative field? What helped you fully commit to your path, even if it wasn't what your parents wanted for you to do, which is something that I think as a community in Asian American that we relate as innovators, because often I'm sure all of the path that you've chose, probably something not what your parents said, like, this is what I think it's going to be successful. And I know last week we spoke quite a bit about it, but I would love to still hear from maybe how that impacts maybe in the way you show up in your community. So yes, Hanju, if I can first start with you.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that with my parents, it's definitely, like the typical, like, oh, my mom doesn't want me to be a creative because it's not going to make money, it's unstable, and like all those things. But I think that like kind of reduces down and like really reduces down what the actual conversation is, right? Because with my parents, like being first-gen immigrants, being relatively like at poverty level, to be really frank, there's a lot more about making their sacrifice worth it, right? So in my mind, of course, it's like, no, let me do what I want, but also at the same time, I want to respect the fact that they came to this country, that they faced all this racism, that they barely tried to learn this language that doesn't make sense, and like immerse themselves in this culture that is completely different than their own to be able to raise me, right? And so, yeah, there's just a lot of these very complicated emotions when it comes to our parents, especially those that have, really rough relationships with their parents, those have really loving relationships with their parents, like being immigrant, first gen, second gen, third gen, being like Southeast Asian versus East Asian versus all these things. So yeah, I think at the surface level, of course, it's just like oh, like being creative is unstable, so my mom doesn't want that. She wants me to make money. But I think for me and my parents, it's a lot of me wanting to, make up for that sacrifice. And the reason why they don't want me to go into the creatives is because they want me to be safe. Like they want me to make a better life for myself and to not have to suffer through the things that they suffered through. And so, I think in general, that's kind of how I wish the conversation would go a little bit more, is deeper into not just the surface level tiger mom, but deeper into like what it really means to be an immigrant child, what it really means to have that relationship with your family. Mm.
So I'm going to jump in on that one. So growing up, I was always creative. I loved to paint things and create things, but it was always something like that is a great hobby, but that's never anything. It was just a known thing in our family. That's never something you're going to do for work. So I went and followed my parents' vocal cues of going to college, getting my MBA, and going into business. But as an adult and later into my adulthood, I realized that ultimately, yes, our parents sacrificed so much for us, and there was that feeling of responsibility. But that whole, like you're saying, Han, going deeper, ultimately, my parents just want me to be happy, right? They all just want us to be happy. And in following this career path, in combining my business skills and my creative skills, I've really been able to find a path for myself, regardless of what my parents thought, and just kind of press forward regardless of what they thought. And in the end, seeing that I'm happy has made them happier than I've ever seen them before.
Yeah, related to that, I think I also had parents who prefer stability. Both my parents, eventually found jobs in big companies, and I ended up working for a big company. I was actually in Atlanta at AT&T, and that's the job I quit in order to start my own company. And it was like, what? Why would you do that? You had the iron rice bowl, is a saying in some Asian languages. Why would you do that? And I realized what kept me going, back to the original question, is that the community that I was working with wanted to know how I got there, and they wanted to follow this path. And so I realized I'm onto something where I can provide value. But at the same time, the narrative for back home is completely different. The narrative back home is, how do I show indicators of success that make sense from an immigrant perspective that may want stability? So when I'm able to hire employees, or when I'm able to be sustainable for 9 years now, or things like that. So like that's the story I tell at home, but then out in the on the field, I tell a different story about pursuing my passion, giving back, creating value, and so forth.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Hope you're all taking notes and really taking these moments to sink in, because to be honest, I think, throughout my career and life, it was just so hard to have these kind of conversations. And I think what I realized is that it's just so important to take the moment to express, take a moment to pause and really think about, okay, so these are the values I love and thrive upon. These are the things that I know it's kind of making me feel limited. What can I do with it? What are the voices that's putting me in labels? And for those who have seen the preview, some of the messaging that I said is that often innovators, the one thing is that we don't like to be put in a box. And I know the jargon has been putting outside the box as being creative, but it's so much more than that. And, as all three of them have briefly shared, whether it's from the family pressure or the culture pressure, part of the beauty is that what probably they'll share later as well as like how that in itself not only helped them grow, but through that actually empower them. And so going to tie to that actually to another question that was raised on, what then has been your biggest inspiration to push forward connected to that? And so we'd love to hear maybe next to Tarina and then Ying.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's interesting because growing up as a young South Asian woman, looking in the media and looking at a lot of places, it's hard to find representation, people that look like you doing what you want to do. And for me, my dream is to work in politics. And so for the longest time, I saw nobody that looked like me. That's starting to change. And some of the incredible people here are already changing that and increasing representation. But for me, a lot of that inspiration, that pushing forward came from my family. Like I always tell the story, my biggest inspiration has been my grandfather. And he always used to say, stay happy, healthy, holy, hilarious all the time. He made me say it every time we were sitting down to have dinner. And then he gave me this shirt that said, when pigs fly, with like this really cute cartoon of a pig flying. And for me, he would always tell me that I truly have the power to do anything, be anyone, no matter what anyone says. And so I always remember that phrase and I always remember that shirt. I still have it and wear it all the time, that we all have the ability to turn the impossible into the possible. We have the ability to, you know, make pigs fly, as a cliche as it sounds. But I think for me, that inspiration, as if you don't see that person that you want to see in the media, you can still be that person, because we find that strength from within our own community at the end of the day, from within ourselves, and just from relying on the incredible innovators and trailblazers you see around you.
That was beautiful, Tarina. It's so interesting that you mentioned the biggest inspiration is your grandpa. My biggest inspiration is also my grandpa. He actually named me because initially my name was in Chinese character. My dad gave me Lu Yanying, means pretty and creative land. And grandpa was like, nah, she doesn't need to be pretty. She just needs to be happy. And he chooses the character to Yi, means happiness. So I was like, way to go, grandpa. I do think, apart from my grandpa, my grandmother, like everybody in the family, I think it really down to the people that I have get the chance to encounter with every day, day in and day out. It's the human spirit that we all have the opportunity to, whether it's virtually, I've never met any of you down here, but it's this exchange between people. And I always believe that the real innovation is coming from learning from others, because we know what we know what we don't know, but we don't know what we don't know. And that's our blind spot. And this is what other people can give you, their own perspectives that can make you feel more whole and complete.
So important to think about who we spend time with, how we spend our days, and who we choose to continue to build our extended family. I know a friend, family? I had the most difficult time learning how to pronounce it, your chosen family. You know, I'll be honest, like I think in the Asian culture, like I kind of had a mixed feeling initially about some of those words, but you know, you both say it beautifully because it's both your direct family who have those relationships. And I would add that, plus that sometimes we have those relationships in our families and kind of building on that. The word choices make a huge difference in thinking about happiness and joy. And so with all of that being said, what I also love about our current conversation in our audience, and what the audience has been asking already, is that, well, that's all cool, but you know, can we go a layer deeper? And you know, we love this because all of this has additional nuance of Asian American is not one type of voice. As you all saw briefly of all of us on the screen, when I pull us back together, we all look different. The way we innovate is all different, and our journey of what it means to be Asian American is different. And in fact, that means sometimes, you know, we're mixed. We have different ethnicity. We have a different story of how we got here. And so there were some questions of even, you know, Alex raising, how do Asian Americans embrace the diversity with different races? I know we were chatting here for a little bit about how that influences how we show up in our Asian communities. So we'd love to piggyback and maybe follow up specifically, Emily and Emiko, if you can briefly share about kind of your insights about how that influences how you serve, and, you know, tell us a little bit more what's on your mind.
Sure. You know, when Tarina was talking about, you know, just growing up and not having any of that representation, you know, that really spoke to me too, because I'm half Asian, but I'm also half Latina. And, you know, there was no one, you know, like me when I was growing up. And I think just coming from that space of, you know, just being marginalized, or maybe not even like accepted within each of the communities, really colors everything that I do and how I approach my students and how I relate to them. You know, there are so many beautiful things about the different Asian cultures, but I feel like, you know, there's a lot of work to do as well with, you know, different issues like colorism, for example. You know, why is it, you know, that's a thing, you know, in the Asian community and in the Latino community and the African American community. You know, why does that matter so much, and why do we place so much value on that? And again, going back to Tarina, like, you know, she's so young. Like, I think that in the Asian community, we need to give more of a voice to young people. You know, we have such an amazing outlook on, you know, respect for elders, but there are so many amazing things that our young people are doing. And I think that we really need to give them a spotlight as well, to voice their opinions and share their stories and their passions, because they can do some really amazing things for the future.
Yeah, there was a question about the third culture of when your home life is very different from the outside world. And what Emily and I share in common is I'm also Hapa. I'm Czech and Japanese. And I was raised in Minnesota and have spent the last 18 years in Georgia. And I am misraced all the time. And my first name is Laura, like a lot of fresh off the boat Asian moms. They give us an Anglo-sounding name that will help us assimilate, they think, right? And so my first name is Laura, and my last name is Soltis, which is Czech, but it sounds like Solis, which is a very, very common Latinx last name. So I get introduced as Laura Mico Soltis always, and it's an honor to be accepted into the Latinx community, oftentimes because I'm working in immigrant spaces. But I think even though I struggled with my Hapa identity growing up, I did a study abroad in Japan thinking finally, at 20, I'm going to fit in. I went there and I spoke Japanese, and my name was Emiko, and everyone around me was like, that's so fascinating, your name is Emiko. And I was like, yo, I'm Japanese. And it's because I have green eyes that not one Japanese person saw me as Japanese. And, in the South, there's a very predominant, although it's changing, black-white binary of talking about race. And the third most common language after English and Spanish is Korean in Georgia. And there's a very, very large immigrant community of people who aren't black and white. And it turns out that biracial identity that I struggled with my whole life has made me very comfortable on the borderlands, what Gloria Anzaldúa says, like the borderlands of identity, of being able to translate across races, across languages, across ethnicities, and being comfortable in that discomfort that a lot of people have. Is every single relationship, maybe Emily, you understand, is interracial. It's exhausting to always have to negotiate racial difference in every interpersonal relationship, every romantic relationship. And that exhaustion that I've experienced my entire life actually is my superpower in helping. And I predominantly organize in Black and Latinx spaces, but strangely, having a biracial identity helps me kind of navigate those dialogues with others about how we build interracial conversations and interracial solidarity. And so for me, even though I struggled with it, being biracial and Hapa has become my superpower in translating. Mm-hmm.
Thank you both so much for sharing that. We're having a little fire moment in our group chat because Tim, shout out to you. He was sharing about how, as a multicultural Asian Pacific Island himself as well, and going through the third culture all the time, he's resonating very much with both of you, what you share. And, frankly, you're probably one of the many, right? Because we are living in a world, as you see, look at us, we're all different, and we all look different. And can you imagine what the world would look like 5-10 years in the future? And we're like, guys, look back then, this is how we thought diversity is. Look how narrow we thought diversity was. Like, there's so many different ways to go deeper and expand upon that. And it's just so beautiful. But, because I'm also about curiosity, I'm always curious about, okay, that's one thing to celebrate and talk about it and be empowered. But as you all serve communities and you work with these different stakeholders, I'm sure you also had some crazy, unexpected, I never thought I was going to partner with this group, but like, that was the best partnership with the creative way in collaborating. And so, first, raise your hand if you ended up ever partnering with somebody that you never thought you would. Raise your hand, yes, no, yes. Right, so take a look at that. I mean, that's part of the reflection of being an innovator, is that probably takes a lot of courage, I'll admit, on my part. And it takes a lot of gut, because sometimes it doesn't work out. And you got to be okay with it. You learn from it and grow with it. I know, Priyanka, Emily, you have some thoughts to share. We'd love to hear from each one of you. Priyanka.
Thank you, Monica. So I want to give you my example as a media entrepreneur who runs her own podcast, which is Career Startup, to spotlight Asian entrepreneurs. When I had the idea of podcast, there were two things going in the back of mind. One, I wanted to represent and spotlight more Asian stories, Asian entrepreneurs, to ignite and inspire conversations. Two, I'm usually very curious about, how people think about their personal journey, the challenges that they face. So as a naturally curious person and a distinguished Toastmaster, I thought it was a perfect medium for me to get into a podcast world. But as I got started, how do you find the right kind of speakers? How do you promote your work? How do you form these partnerships? Everything was a, scare in a crazy world. So for me, reaching out to my friends on LinkedIn, especially Monica, she was very supportive in terms of being a guest on my show. And my network of own friends, whom I knew, but not at a very personal level, but they were kind enough to open up and share their personal stories. So I was amazed at the power of my own network of friends who could help me get started as an entrepreneur in my own way. And two, when I reached out to people on Twitter and LinkedIn, as I set up my own social media profiles, I was amazed at the generosity that people would provide to me by tweeting or liking or sharing my posts. And I would just say, hey, I'm so and so, and I started a podcast. I know you're Asian American. Is it something that you'd be interested in, tooting about? And as a woman, it's kind of hard to do that ask. And when you reach out to men, women, binary, non-binary, it's kind of tough to navigate that feeling of awkwardness. But I was amazed, people that I never met, I made friends with them on Twitter and LinkedIn, and they've been very supportive. So now I have a squad. Monica's part of it. It's called a Twitter squad and a LinkedIn squad. It's basically a group of my cheerleaders who get notified every time there's something that I want to post. And my network of friends would like to post as well. So it's a network where we toot and share our achievements and the work that we do. So I'm really impressed by what we can do by just asking out for help. And I think as Asian Americans, we think twice. And me, as somebody who likes doing things by herself, I hate asking for help. So I think you just have to overcome that bridge. And I've formed amazing partnerships. And look where I am today, meeting another huge network of friends through Monica. So thank you all for that support and generosity. And I would like to continue paying it forward.
Yeah, so I think, what Emika was talking about, like, really resonated with me. And I know I saw in the chat, Tim, you were talking about how you kind of really related to what we were talking about. And I think that, as a community, we need to, be more accepting of each other. Usually when I tell someone that I'm half Korean, the first thing they say is like, well, you don't look like it. And it's interesting because, those messages get internalized. And, after like much reflection, I think I realized that because I felt like other people didn't view me a certain way, that like, I didn't really feel that way either. So, there was a lot of like soul searching and like, trying to figure out like, well, who am I and where do I fit in? And like, why is it that like other people see me this way? So yeah, I just think that, if there's anyone else out there who's listening, who kind of feels like you're in that identity limbo, let's, get together and support each other and, just start having those conversations because, I'm sure there's more of us out there. and let's think about how we respond to other people, when we talk about race and identity and representation.
Yeah, I think identity is really formed when we're young in the environment that we grow up with. And I happen to live in an Asian American majority community where, like 90% of my AP classes were Asian. And in that environment, even then, like, there's stereotypes of what a successful, cool Asian male looks like. Back then, it was like you're a gangster wannabe, spiked hair, baggy jeans. You drove like a Honda Accord or something like cool, Rice Rocket. That was seen as cool. So I mean, we talk about like maybe white men making jokes about Asian men, but then there's also Asian men who also make look down on other Asian men for not being cool. And so that was the environment I grew up in, and I think. The best thing is that I did for myself was go elsewhere, go abroad. I studied abroad in China and I traveled to other places, and then people are just curious, who am I from a fresh perspective? And that kind of made me reorient my identity into a larger like Asian American identity instead of just the identity that I knew as a kid.
Yeah, that's I actually grew up in a I grew up on the East Coast where there weren't that many Asians. As an East Coast Asian, I was defaulted to one of those self-loathing Asians that was kind of like ashamed to bring their mom's dumplings to school and stuff. And like how mainstream media, they've always emasculated Asian men in entertainment, and I've always had trouble like breaking out of that archetype when I was hanging out with my friends or like even trying to date women. It was always so hard to get out of that. And for me, my coping mechanism was really just like be funny, and that was like how I came to find comedy. And now that I'm like in the entertainment industry and I'm trying to redefine stereotypes, a lot of my comedy comes from pointing out the ridiculousness of like, why is it this way, and things like that, and like, you know, just really trying to like deconstruct like why we think, like why are these the given stereotypes that everyone has, and how do we redefine them through comedy. So that's one of the things that I'm working on, especially when I'm writing stories or screenplays. Like, how do we talk about, how do we share those underrepresented voices and those underrepresented narratives through story.
Being, I know, connected to that right now, to add to all of this, name is something that reflects a lot. And I admit, I've butchered a lot of people's name before in the past, or even live, and apologies. And, you know, there's been a great conversation going on. I know you wanted to share some thoughts on that particular question. Could you share a little bit more, please?
Sure, absolutely. It's funny because I was born and raised in Shanghai, China. So I'm kind of the opposite of a lot of your experiences here. I grew up in 100% Chinese community. Like, I'm like, people ask you like, are you an ABC? I'm like, no, I'm CBC. They're like, Canadian Chinese? I'm like, no, Chinese. I was born and raised in China. So what's really interesting, I'm actually Australian Chinese. But the funny thing is, and you would never guessed, if you look at me, you're just like, she's Asian. And that is true too. But the funny thing is, I think my name, I've been really kind of contemplating on the idea of identity, and your name is your identity, and your name is your unique voice. What I love about it is when I was study English when I was in Shanghai, China, I remember we had this English teacher came in, and he's giving everybody every Chinese student English names, and we can name ourselves according to the pronunciation. So at the time, I was trying to find an English name that is similar to my Chinese first name. So Yiying, the most similar name is Ian. So I was like, I'm gonna call myself Ian, and he's like, but that's a guy's name. I'm like, why can't I have a guy's name? That's a guy's name. So I ended up just stick with Yiying. And then when I moved to Australia, I thought I want to be different. And I was also learning Japanese from my dad. He's a Japanese Chinese translator. So I thought it'd be really fun to have like a unique name that nobody else have. So I kind of ditched my entire name, and I went for in Japan, like my last name, Lu is pronounced as Ligu. And then I just called myself Ligu, and everybody was like, that's a weird name. I was like, yes, I want to be weird. And eventually I came back to my Chinese name when I was in my first year at university, at University of Technology, Sydney. And I remember I was telling my professor, I said, my name is Li Gu, which is this weird name that nobody knows how to pronounce. And then he said, but what's your Chinese name? I said, Yiying. And he said, what does it mean? I said, happy and creative. He's like, that's you. That's a beautiful name. Why don't you own that name? And it was a second, I think I was almost about to cry. I think it's this interesting journey of denying yourself, like denying what's already beautiful, what's already perfect, and thinking that I can find something better than that. But it's this departure, it's this separation from your true self, and then come back around, getting guidance from others and realizing, wow, this is me, and I'm okay with it. I'm actually really happy. And I suddenly remember, like, my grandpa gave me that name from conversation with my parents. And so that's how I get around and kind of find myself. So I would love to also hear everybody's story too.
So my name in elementary school was Cecilia. My parents gave me a baptized name of Cecilia, and I went with that name from kindergarten all the way through 8th grade. And when I had an opportunity to change schools and go into high school, I changed it back to Van, because at home in my neighborhood, I went by Van. At school, somehow my parents thought I would be more assimilated if I went by Cecilia. And it just never felt like who I was. So I think similar to Ying, what she's saying is your name is so much a part of who you are. And what I found in the culture of the workplace is going by Van has never, sometimes people might think like, oh, if I go by a more cultural name, it might impact me negatively in the workplace. I have never found that for myself, at least in the workplace. The only thing I would say that has brought up a lot of conversation, like, how do you pronounce your name? And that brings back that whole idea of voice again. For a long time, I just allowed people to butcher my name, right? And I really had to come to that skill of just saying, oh, actually it's pronounced like this. And what that has done is it's allowed me to open up this conversation about where I'm from and tell more of my story, which I think has been beautiful. What I also think it does is it gives other people the permission to tell their story as well. So that's how it's impacted me in culture, in the workplace. I see a little note here about how to be more respectful in the workplace. In terms of culture, I feel like I think people sometimes tiptoe around this conversation of like where you're from, what your culture is. And I see why that is, because some people can take offense to, like, if you ask them where they're from, people ask me where I'm from. I say Vietnam, even though I was basically raised in Los Angeles. And I think in both directions, people ask questions about culture politely. And then also, if you're on the receiving end of a question, know that most people, they're not there to insult you, right? They're not there to insult you. They really are curious. So we're approaching questions in a way that you're not being defensive to their question.
The word choice.
I want to add a little bit after Van, because Van mentioned about butchering names. I thought that was a really I have a fun story to share because I remember back in the days I was doing exchange study in London, and I had a roommate. She's lovely Korean. She's born and raised in Korean, and then moved to London for her school. And her English name is Annie. And I asked her, "What's your Korean name then?" Because I was like expecting it's something similar, and she said it's Annie. Wait, what's your Korean name? Oh, Changwon. But that has nothing to do with your English name. Okay, so this is what happened. When she came over to England, the teacher had a hard time to pronounce her Korean name because she doesn't speak Korean. And so she said, "Would you like to have an English name?" And she said, "Sure." And then the teacher said, "So what kind of English name would you like?" And she said, "Annie," which means any name will do. So she kind of just stuck with Annie. And I was like, that's kind of messed up. And so it was really wonderful. I think that came to a realization. She later on came back to her Korean name. Another really interesting sort of recent discovery, I was having a conversation with a student. Her Thai name is Nishpat, and she's studying in Bath, UK. And so we were having an online discussion. She emailed me. She saw one of my YouTube video about my design, cross-cultural design. So she asked me a lot of questions via email. I thought it'd be easier just do a Zoom call. And so when I kind of meet her for the first time, I said, "You sent me 2 emails. One is Kyle and one is Kylie. Which one should I call you?" And I said, "But you're also from Thailand. What's your Thai name?" And she said, "It's Nishpat." And I said, "It's a beautiful name, but why you have 2 English names?" She said, "Well, when I go to England, my teacher gave me the name Kylie, and then all my peers wanted to make it short, so they wanted to call me Kyle." And I said, "Okay, what's your Thai name actually means?" And she said, "Nishpat in Thai actually means be yourself." So I just want to leave it there. I said, "I'm going to call you Nishpat no matter what."
And that intention makes such a difference. As everyone has shared, and take a look at everyone here again. All of us are here with a different journey. And if you can pull back out again, I asked you also to show us what's a random object that brings you a lot of joy. Do you have that ready with you? So I know there's many things that probably bring you a lot of joy, but if you are ready, I'm going to pull mine out too. So 1, 2, 3. Look at all the different things. And thank you very much for sharing that. I want you all to follow up with these individuals and get to know them, right? Their stories and their journeys, thinking about their names have a value. We're having a bit of a blast here in the group chat. They're all talking about their name histories. We have from Dorothy, different people sharing how, wow, so it's not just me. And, I wanted to thank you all for being open to sharing and being honest, because can you all agree that these are things that we need to talk more about and just talk about the nuances? It's not just one layered, and you all walking the talk, and I hope all of you joining online are resonating. Leave it in the comment box if you're joining after the live show, and if you're live, shout out hello of things that you're thinking about. But that all being said, with the few minutes that we have left, we're also all about action. So while I do want to empower you, I'm glad we had this vulnerable moment to go deep and really pause and be reflective. But you're all about actions too. So I want to hear about actions and what we can do next. So maybe I can hear again in the order earlier that we had from each one of you, just briefly, what is one piece of action, maybe one piece of advice that you can share with the innovators out there, whether they are Asian American or not, just, from any walks of life, what's one thing they can do better that would help them not only name shame themselves, let any label define them, just walk their path so that they can serve and ignite to not only be innovative, but serve their community. So Priyanka, if we can start with you.
I would say two things. One is believe in yourself, no matter what the world tells you are. Two is have empathy for yourself and the person whom you're dealing with.
I would say learn outside of your own community, because that will help you understand your community more or broaden your definition of community.
Yeah, I think I'd say also two things. Take care of yourself. I think that there is this huge paradox of progress, right? Where we are like at the best quality of life human history has ever known, but at the same time, we are more depressed, more anxious, a lot of things that are going on in the world that I think we sort of take a little bit too steps forward, like a little bit too forward, and forget that we're human and that we're people and we need to like be people and take care of ourselves. And then I think in terms of being Asian, learn about your history. In Asian American history, Asian Australian history, Asian UK history, Asian history, right? There's so much in our blood and like our people that I think that we don't really dive into as much as we should. And I think that if you take a step back and look at history, there's a lot there. There's a lot to uncover and unpack.
Yeah, I would say embrace what makes you different. Like having a unique, diverse perspective is really valuable, especially when the majority of people talking on TV are straight white dudes. So find what makes you different and embrace it, because that's what makes you special.
And I would say that we all have something unique to offer, and innovation comes from curiosity. And I'm a firm believer that our curiosity is intuitive. We are curious about certain things because we're meant to follow those curiosities. So pause when you're curious about something and try to follow that.
I think I would say two things. One, celebrate yourself, where you come from, and celebrate those around you, because once you start listening and learning about others and finding those perspectives, that's where the best ideas come from. And two, fire. My object was a candle. Find what ignites you, find what sets that fire inside of you, because once you have that fire, there's nothing that can stop you in making your vision, your dream into a reality.
I would say that, we should be mindful of our journeys and, take the time to celebrate the small victories, because if you think about people's like big, huge accomplishments, those are all results of like the smaller successes that happened along the way. So, to take the time and to enjoy those smaller accomplishments and, celebrate those victories. And, I feel like one of the themes here today was empathy. And I think that's so important. And I know on last week's show, you're watching, you said something that really resonated with me. You said to lift people as you rise. And I think that's so beautiful. As we become more successful, let's bring people with us. And, we can all have a spot, at the table, so to speak.
Yeah, I think we all have a unique perspective. We all have a unique voice, and we bring something that's solely from us to the world. And I've always believed that anything is possible in this world, and that was in the 90s. So it's even more true now with all the various platforms and these type of collaboration communities. So know that, whatever that you see that's different, bring that out. And if there's things that are roadblocks, like I had to overcome my introversion and my shyness, that just Google the principle of small steps, because that is such a powerful way to overcome our fear. And it's one of the most transformative things I've heard in a really long time that I learned a couple months ago. So look up small steps, because if we have this big, scary goal, that's the way we'll get there. And that's how I overcame being on camera, talking in front of crowds, those types of things. But that's also how I've gotten to be in this innovation journey. So hope that helps.
I want to encourage people to show up in the world just as who you are, because people think oftentimes that success looks a certain way, that, like you have to be a certain personality. in order to be successful in this world. And that is not the case at all. So I encourage people to just like show up and do you, however, you know, it is. And that is like, you have a special message for every single person out there, and you communicate it in your own way. So, you know, I'm still very early on in my journey, and still like learning more about how like I can use my voice in the community. But always show up. I'm in your own way, in your own voice.
Great. So another part of my identity is I'm a professor, I'm a teacher. That's a big part of who I am. And I really show up with my students. I'm really privileged to be one of the only teachers in the world where all of my students are undocumented, and I go in always learning from them. But I wanna share two pieces of advice: is learn your history. I teach immigration history, so I have to dork out a little bit. This book is really important, Impossible Subjects, and then Reworking Race. And these really touch on interracial Asian American history, and also how Asians have worked together with other racial groups, especially when it comes to farm labor. And so focus on that history, learn your history, because it can empower you. Also that, you know, especially as Asian women, there's 2 billion of us, and so many people in the United States can't name one Asian woman in history, right? And instead of looking for that role model, be that role model that you wish you had had, you know? And I think learning that history, and also being Asian women, like the first restrictive immigration law was against Chinese women with the Page Act in 1875, right? And this was to prevent them having children so that Asians couldn't be citizens, right? We have a history in immigration history, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Asiatic Barred Zone Act, to the Johnson-Reed Act. We need to know this history so we can find and build solidarity with others, especially in the immigrant rights movement. So learn your history, and Asian women, don't be afraid to get in trouble and make history yourself. So someone asked to share the books again, I'm sorry. It has all my notes, but Impossible Subjects, the Illegal Aliens in the Making of Modern America, and Reworking Race.
Amazing, Laura. I'm gonna take notes, and I'm gonna read those books for sure. I echo so much of what Laura just said. I think I was literally just watching the PBS video of Asian American, the documentary last night, and it brings me to tears. One thing I think it's really important for us to do here is to celebrate, because it's the AAPI month, and just looking at the video and seeing how many people sacrifice their life coming over all the way from overseas to start a new life. And even like every single time when they do a task, many people die. And you are all you're all the offsprings of the survivors. And it's so amazing for us to be alive. So celebrate. That's so important, to honor our ancestor and what they have bring to us, and allow us to have the life that we are living in right now. And secondly, I think it is also important to breathe and laugh, and you know, having the opportunity to go deep, but also living in like be alive in pleasure. That's also really important, because only if you're staying in a higher vibration, then you can be happier, you can be more creative. I'm plugging my name here. I would love to see more people being happy and creative. And in the meantime, it's okay to cry. It's okay to honor, you know, the suffering all the ancestors have been carrying on for us, and release those energy for them as the younger generation. I think crying is actually a beautiful thing, because it's like you need to pee if you have toxins in your body, right? So we need to release that energy. We need to release it for our ancestors as well, because crying is just like peeing from your eyes.
I love that form of expression. Well, can you all give a round of applause for everyone for sharing such wisdom? I mean, like, I know we're having a little moment even in our group chat. I'm like, I wish we had more hours to talk about this, and, you know, the number, and I know even in the group chat, they're having a blast here. I mean, we have 20 of them live streaming together. So we're literally having a virtual group conversation. And, you know, hey, there's a reason why I kept this title Unscripted, because, hey, for folks who've been joining live, We took your questions live. And this is the very reason why I wanted to have this type of conversation, because many of these stories are so needed and it's so real, but we don't have enough spaces to talk about it. And, you know, just to recap finally a few things that everyone has shared: celebrate, know your history, empathy, express, explore, connect, and create. There's no limits. Don't let any label, whether you're tuning in as a non-Asian American, shout out to you. This is for everyone. We just happened to choose this theme for Asian American because it's Asian American Pacific Island Heritage Month in May, but that doesn't mean that this conversation is silo. I'm super excited. Even when I was posting this yesterday, somebody posted it like, oh, I would love to do this for the Italian community. I'm like, let's talk about that, because we need to celebrate all these different communities. And, you know, Emiko, we're already getting a lot of shout outs. Like, Monica, are you going to send us the link to the book? So I'm going to follow up with you later so that we get the links to the book so we can put that there so that we all learn a little bit more about our history. But as we finally wrap up and reflect upon it, I have a few quotes to share. Confucius: roads were made for journeys, not destinations. And Gandhi said, be the change that you wish to see in the world. And the future depends on what you do today. So thank you, friends, innovators, for spending and choosing to spend the time here right now with me, to be present, to share your stories, and just be honest about how nuanced and amazing it is, and celebrating your Asian American and innovation and innovators and what you do. Thank you, all 20 plus friends online and many others who's going to see this later, and sharing that space together. And so with that, we'll see you later again. And see you next